In this quiet seaside town in northern France, thousands of miles of cables are manufactured each year and then dropped into the ocean to become the superhighway of the internet. Over 95% of international internet traffic travels from continent to continent through cables on the ocean floor that, for the most part, are no larger than a garden hose.
That translates into $10 trillion a day in economic transactions that go over these cables that most people don't know exist.
There are nearly 1 million miles of subsea communication cables in service globally, running from almost every continent. These cables can carry hundreds of terabits of data per second. To understand how subsea cables work, CNBC visited the world's largest manufacturer of these internet arteries. We're here at Alcatel Submarine Network's subsea cable manufacturing facility in Calais, France. It's cables just like this one behind me that span the oceans. There's hundreds of them. And information that travels along these cables includes anything from financial transactions and government communications to things as simple as email and streaming movies. About how many people would you say are able to communicate through one of these cables?
The entire planet through one cable.
One of these cables, the entire planet can talk?
Yes, in terms of voice call, you can use that.
You've seen this huge growth in submarine cables over the past 20 years, and this is driven by just a voracious demand for data.
Much of this new demand and investment is coming from tech giants, including Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Amazon, who are all racing to develop computation-intensive AI models and connect their growing networks of data centers.
AI is increasing the need that we have for subsea infrastructure. Oftentimes when people think about AI, they think about data centers, they think about compute, they think about data. But the reality is, without the connectivity that connects those data centers, what you have are really expensive warehouses.
But the importance of this critical infrastructure has also made it the target of suspected sabotage.
Germany, Sweden and Finland are all investigating the damage to 2 undersea communications cables in the Baltic Sea as an act of sabotage.
Taiwan's Coast Guard has detained a Chinese crewed cargo ship over suspicions it may have severed an undersea telecommunications cable.
In August, the Federal Communications Commission, which is responsible for granting licenses to anyone wishing to install or operate subsea cables connecting to the U.S., introduced tighter rules to foreign firms building this infrastructure, citing security concerns.
There's a lot of threats right now to undersea cables because there's nothing that a foreign adversary would like more than to control the information environment. And if you can stop the exchange of 99% of global internet traffic by shutting down or effectively compromising undersea cable, it's no surprise to see that that's what foreign adversaries are interested in.
CNBC spoke to government officials, subsea cable manufacturers, and tech giants to find out why subsea cables are crucial to keeping us connected and what we can do to protect this critical infrastructure. Subsea cables are not a new technology. The first commercial telecommunication subsea cable was made of copper and was laid across the English Channel between Dover, England and Calais, France in 1850.
The first submarine cables were telegraph cables. So then it evolved to coaxial cable, which carried telephone conversations. And then they moved to fiber optic cables in the 80s. Since then, we have been able to transmit multiple telephone conversations first, then the internet.
When we talk about subsea cables, we're often referring to telecommunication cables. But high-voltage power cables also crisscross our oceans. These cables are thicker and are used to carry electricity from renewable energy projects or to connect grids. But the majority of subsea cables transfer data and make up the backbone of our internet. Those are the focus of this report. At the crux of modern-day subsea cable technology are optical fibers, which transmit information in the form of light pulses. Dozens of these hair-like fibers are consolidated into a single cable. As the light signal travels along the fibers, however, it loses some of its power in a process known as attenuation. To prevent this, cable makers install devices called repeaters about every 50 to 62 miles to re-amplify the signal. The cables are just one part of the infrastructure. The rest is on dry land, where the cables connect to the terrestrial network at a landing station. What role do landing stations play in the scheme of the subsea system?
So 2 types of equipment in the station. What we call power feeding equipment, which is used to send energy to the submerged repeaters because they don't operate on batteries. They need electrical current to operate. And then we have the transmitters and receivers which actually inject the telecom signals into the fiber.
Subsea cables have traditionally been privately owned by a consortium of companies, usually telecom operators, or by entrepreneurs who build and lease out the capacity. But more recently, a new customer has emerged.
About 10 years ago, we saw the advent of another big category, which is the web-scale players, and the likes of Meta, Google, Amazon, etc., who represent now probably 50% of the overall market.
Investment into new subsea cable projects is expected to reach around $13 billion between 2025 and 2027. Almost twice the amount that was invested between 2022 and 2024.
We've been investing in subsea cables since the mid-2010s, and today we have more than 20 that are under construction or in operations, and we've made a significant commitment to continue to invest in this area.
One of those investments is to Africa, a cable that Meta owns as part of a consortium. The cable, which is nearly complete, spans 28,000 miles, connects 3 continents, and costs over $1 billion. But the company also has a proprietary project in the works. Project Waterworth will span 31,000 miles across 5 continents, making it the world's longest subsea cable project. Meta has said that Waterworth is a multi-billion-dollar project. Google is another large player, having invested in over 30 subsea cables. One of the company's latest projects is Sol, which will connect the US, Bermuda, the Azores, and Spain. Tech giants say that subsea cable connectivity is necessary to meet growing customer demand for their cloud and AI services across the globe, as well as to meet future needs.
We're building cable systems that are going to exist for 25 plus years. Therefore, when we're investing, we're not investing based on today's demand. We're investing to enable future products and services that have yet to even be invented.
Amazon, alongside partners, has invested in several cable projects, including Bifrost, Jacko, and Havru. In November, Amazon announced Fastnet, its first proprietary cable that will connect Maryland to Ireland.
Subsea is really essential for AWS and for any connectivity internationally across oceans. And so without subsea, you'd have to rely on satellite connectivity, which can work, but satellite has higher latency, higher costs, and you just can't get enough capacity or throughput to what our customers and the internet in general needs.
Microsoft, too, is pushing forward with new subsea cable projects.
What we have seen is a quite rapid increase from, say, 2016-17, where the overall market for telecom submarine systems was about $2 billion a year. So then it moved to $4 billion a year, with Meta and Google starting to build their own systems. And now what we are seeing today is that the market is growing to $5, even $6 billion a year.
Alcatel Submarine Networks is working to meet this increased demand. The company has been in business for over 165 years and is the world's largest manufacturer and installer of subsea telecommunication cables.
Since the beginning of the production of ASM, we produce 850,000 kilometers, which means approximately 21 times the circumference of the Earth.
Wow, that's a lot of cable.
It's quite a lot, yeah.
Despite the volume of cable deployed, it still remains a niche business.
There's 4 major companies that manufacture these subsea cables: Subcom in the United States, NEC in Japan, Alcatel in France, and H&M Tech in China.
Can you name any of your big customers?
Google, Meta, we have of course coming, what we see now is newcomers like Amazon, Microsoft, and we have of course all the, I would say, historical operators. Okay, we have Orange, Vodafone, Saudi Telecom. More or less, I would say there are 10 to 15 customers in that business, no more.
CNBC visited ASN's cable manufacturing facility in northern France, as well as the company's repeater factory in Greenwich, England, to see what it takes to build a subsea cable. Step 1 is sourcing the optical fiber.
We have 2 different suppliers. One is American and the other one is Japanese.
Next, the optical fiber gets encased in a metal tube to protect the delicate glass strands before the tube is further strengthened.
We add this extra wire to build a vault which will resist to the water pressure. And after that, we put the copper.
The copper acts as a conductor to power the cable. The copper layer is then encased in plastic, which constitutes what is known in the industry as a lightweight cable. Depending on where the cable will be installed, manufacturers can add extra layers of protection.
In that case, we put another layer of steel wires around the polyethylene, and one layer, which we call single armor, and sometimes double layer, which we call double armor, to provide even more resistance against either some mild aggression or chafing on the sea bottom, etc.
This is double armored, so this you would probably put near the beach or the surface where there's more danger of it being damaged in some way. This is probably not what you would find in really, really deep waters, as probably won't need that much armoring, but this is really heavy. After the cable is armored to the required specifications, it's stored in large tanks where it's tested.
We could put up to 7 meters.
Oh.
After that, we put the water at the same temperature as the temperature of the sea.
If the cable performs as expected, it goes to the final step, where the repeaters manufactured at ASN's Greenwich facility are added to amplify the signal along the cable's length.
So you're seeing the final stage of the process here. The components that you saw earlier have been packaged together and put together into an internal unit and will be pushed into the sea case ready for deployment on the seabed. The sea case is thick enough that it can survive 8,000 meters sea depth.
After final testing, the cable is ready to head to sea. We are here at the Port of Calais, just under a mile outside of the cable manufacturing facility for ASN. This is the last stop for the cable before it gets loaded onto ships and is deployed in the ocean. ASN has a fleet of 7 ships, 4 for cable installation, 2 for maintenance, and 1 that can do both. In shallower water, a plow towed behind the cable ship digs a trench in the seabed and lays the cable inside. In deeper water, the cable faces less risk of external damage, so it can be laid directly on the seabed without having to be buried.
Most cable disruptions anyway have human cause. And these 2 causes are fishing activity, that's the most prevalent, and then the next one is anchoring, anchor dragging. Fishing trawlers, they go down as deep as 1,500 meters. So that's why we usually armor and bury the cable down to a depth of 1,500 meters. Below that, the cable can remain in simple expression, which we call lightweight, because it doesn't need to be protected below 1,500 meters.
The completion of a cable project can take anywhere between 2 to 4 years, depending on its size and complexity. This timeline includes route selection, surveying, permitting, manufacturing, and installation.
So permits can take anywhere between 6 and 24 months to get obtained.
The more countries that a cable passes through, the more permits are needed.
We need to get permits in territorial waters, which extend up to 20 kilometers, and possibly economic zones which extend to 300 kilometers. So if you take the example of the Mediterranean, there is no international water. But then if you go through the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic or the Pacific, there are enormous stretches of international water where we don't have to ask anything. We just have to report where the cable is laid, that's all.
Permitting can be complicated further by geopolitics.
We have an area in the Med, for example, where there are disputed waters between Greece and Turkey. In the Red Sea, the area is in a state of flux right now. Nobody can lay a cable right now. And then the third difficult area is the South China Sea, where China is actually mandating what can or cannot be done in that area. So a number of systems or customers deliberately route their cables around that area to avoid having to ask anything.
Aside from installing and manufacturing the cable, ASN also maintains the infrastructure, servicing over 205,000 miles of cable. As the number of submarine cables has increased over the years, however, cable repair has become somewhat of a chokehold for the industry. In 2023, the average repair time for a subsea cable reached 40 days.
Having a global, worldwide fleet of cable ships ready to serve is very important, and right now we are undergoing a industry-wide discussion on what should be the next model, because right now it's cracking at the seams, I would say.
Damage to submarine systems is relatively common. There are an estimated 100 to 200 incidents that occur annually. The vast majority of these are accidental. That can range from typically anchor dragging to trawler pulling its net along the subfloor to volcanic activity.
Repairing a subsea cable as quickly as possible is key, as disruptions due to cable damage can be quite significant, particularly in areas served by few internet connections.
If you cut a cable or multiple cables, you can cut off multiple countries from internet access, and that includes financial transactions, e-commerce, and basic communications.
This very thing happened to Tonga, an island nation east of Australia. In 2022, debris from an underwater volcanic eruption severed the island's only subsea communication cable, cutting off the island from the rest of the world. In September, cuts to subsea cables in the Red Sea caused disruptions to Microsoft Azure cloud service. The company was able to reroute traffic, but users in Asia and the Middle East still faced increased latency problems and degraded performance. Though experts say that most cable cuts are accidental, Lately, these cables are becoming the suspected targets of sabotage, in a pattern that experts describe as gray zone tactics.
When you have so many vessels in international waters that are highly trafficked by lots of commercial vessels or fishing vessels, the likelihood of accidents is fairly high. But if you're a hostile actor, you know that as well. So if you're sending out the so-called Russian ghost fleet, or if you have a Chinese fishing vessel and a cable is accidentally cut, you could just say, oh, well, it was an accident. But it could be intentional. So it's really hard to discern sometimes when an act of damage is actually intentional or accidental.
Matthew Mooney and his team at Recorded Future, a cybersecurity company, have been tracking some of these cases of suspected sabotage.
We have seen a significant uptick in what we would consider intentional damages in 2024 and 2025. Saw a notable increase in incidents that occurred in the Baltic Sea and around Taiwan. And so it is difficult to be able to determine with 100% validity that these are intentional. However, the fact patterns that emerge from these events does give you cause to be suspicious that they could all be considered accidental.
Mooney says the increase in suspected sabotage has corresponded to increased tensions between Russia and Ukraine and China and Taiwan. Reports earlier this year of China developing an advanced submarine-mounted device that can cut cables deep underwater also concerned some security experts.
China announced that they have this new cable ship. It has cable cutting equipment on it as well, which most cable ships do. That's to repair. You have to pull up the cable, cut it, and put on a new cable. So we shouldn't be too alarmed that a ship has cable cutting equipment. But what makes this so alarming is the depth to which this cable vessel can go. It's to about 4,000 meters, and that they announced it in the first place. Why are they doing this? Are they trying to show their capabilities? Is this a shot across the bow? Should we read between the lines, or is there nothing to read?
Cable surveillance has been brought up as another possible threat.
This is something that falls in the domain of advanced nation-state actors, and so primarily this would be Russia and China, countries that have the ability to access cables at deep ocean depths, have the advanced technology to be able to access the cables without necessarily alerting the cable system owners and operators. There is very limited evidence to date that this has occurred.
With the technology that we have now, tapping a cable is just too difficult to take all that information, decrypt it, and actually make sense of it. So in terms of threats, it's very low.
Experts say bad actors are more likely to target cables at landing sites, where the cables are more easily accessible, or target the software used to monitor the subsea cable systems through cyber attacks or hacks. The hyperscalers that we spoke to also assured us that the risk to their customers' data being intercepted is low.
In addition to building multiple redundant cable paths, we also don't rely on the physical security of the cable itself. For example, all traffic leaving an Amazon facility, we encrypt it at the network level, and then we further encrypt the application level in the stack. And then we even further encrypt on top of that. We don't rely on any single mechanism for security.
Despite there being a lack of concrete evidence of subsea cable sabotage, governments are taking the threat seriously. For example, in January, NATO launched the Baltic Sentry, following several incidents of cable cuts in the Baltic Sea.
It involves the deployment of aircraft, drones, subsea and surface vessels to basically provide a show of force, identify and interrogate vessels that are transiting across the Baltic Sea. And as a result, I don't believe we've seen any instances of cable severings since late January 2025 in the Baltic Sea.
Some governments are also taking a more active role in the build-out of the infrastructure. Alcatel Submarine Networks was an arm of Finnish telecom giant Nokia, until the majority of the company was sold to the French state earlier this year.
Why would the French government have an interest in this company?
I would say the light has arrived on all the critical infrastructure under the sea, and they have decided that it could become a strategic asset for France and for Europe. So that's why they decided to purchase 80% of our shares that were owned by Nokia. Nokia is still minority with 20%.
In the US, the Federal Communications Commission is taking several steps to ensure cable security.
One area we've been particularly focused on are threats that come from the Chinese Communist Party as well as from Russia. So we're taking actions right now to make it difficult or effectively prohibiting the ability to connect undersea cables directly from the US to a foreign adversary nation. We're also taking steps to make sure the hardware that goes into these networks are themselves not compromised. So for instance, we're not allowing Huawei, ZTE, or other, what we view as spy gear, be inserted into these undersea cables.
The FCC says it's also requiring greater transparency around who owns each cable, and will focus on speeding up the permitting process for new cables to encourage more domestic investment. Meanwhile, in July, 3 House Republicans sent a letter to the CEOs of Meta, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, asking them if they had used PRC-affiliated cable maintenance providers. Does Meta work with any Russian or Chinese companies to either install or maintain any of its cable?
Meta works with partners that are compliant with local regulations. We do not work with any Chinese providers of cable systems on systems that we've announced, and we are in full compliance with U.S. policy regulations around partners in the ecosystem and the supply chain.
Amazon also told CNBC they did not work with Chinese companies. Cable manufacturers are also developing new technologies to help customers better monitor their subsea cables. ASN calls its technology Distributed Acoustic Sensing, or DAS. Basically, DAS turns subsea cables into passive sonar arrays, capable of detecting and tracking ships, submarines, wildlife, or other activity near the cable.
So you have a device in the terminal station that sends a signal, and then you measure the reflection inside the fiber at any point, and you can pinpoint precisely where the incident has occurred.
ASN says that its DAS sensing technology is currently limited to monitoring the first 150 kilometers of each end of the cable, but the company is working to expand the sensor capabilities to full-length cables as well. Some of your customers that might be worried about sabotage could potentially use this technology to let them know if there's somebody in the area that shouldn't be there.
That technology is already used in terrestrial systems to protect sensitive infrastructure. So yes, it's the first step of protection, let's say. It's not physical protection, but it's a warning system.
Regardless of how we do it, experts stress that failing to protect our subsea infrastructure would have major consequences for society.
Almost every single element of our daily lives and of our business operations ultimately depends on the successful operation of undersea cables. While we don't think about them, if there was some massive disruption to undersea cables, so much of our daily lives and our business operations would grind to a halt. It would be a significant hit for any country's economy.